Imagine a single building, not a skyscraper, not a stadium, just one factory, humming quietly somewhere in northern France, producing enough shampoo, conditioner, and skincare cream in a single day to fill 40 Olympic swimming pools. Now, imagine, that is just one of over 500 manufacturing sites scattered across 150 countries. Most people, when they think of the wealthiest women on earth, think of Oprah Winfrey, the self-made media queen worth roughly $2.8 billion. A woman whose name is synonymous with power, influence, and generational achievement. They are looking at the surface. Beneath that surface lives a woman so wealthy, so deliberately invisible, and so architecturally removed from public life that most people have never once heard her name. Despite the fact that every single morning, in over 130 countries, people wake up and reach for products that make her richer before they've even had breakfast. She doesn't give interviews. She doesn't walk red carpets. She doesn't post on Instagram. She writes books about the Bible, plays the piano, and quietly controls the single largest personal fortune ever held by a woman in recorded human history. An estimated $99 billion. That is not a typo. What you are about to discover is the full, cinematic, almost unbelievable story of the most powerful woman in the world that the world was never meant to know. In this video, we are tracking the complete rise of a dynasty so dominant, it controls nearly 1/3 of the global beauty industry, an industry worth over $600 billion a year. We are going to uncover how a single French chemist in 1907 accidentally built the foundation of an empire that would eventually be worth more than the entire GDP of Hungary, Kuwait, and Ecuador combined. We are going to walk through the estates, the boardrooms, the courtroom battles, and the shadowy legal structures that protect one of the most fortified private fortunes on the planet. Wait until you hear about the Inheritance War, a family feud so dramatic, so legally complex, and so deeply personal that it consumed an entire decade, involved a sitting French president, and ended with a courtroom verdict that shocked the entire European financial world. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Françoise Bettencourt Meyers, granddaughter of a chemist, heiress to L'Oreal, and the richest woman who has ever lived, has managed to accumulate a fortune that dwarfs Oprah's by a factor of 35 to 1, while remaining almost completely invisible to the outside world. The story starts not with billions. It starts with a bottle. The year is 1907. Paris, France. The Belle Epoque, the beautiful era, is in full bloom. The streets of Montmartre are alive with artists, intellectuals, and a rising middle class discovering, for the first time, the concept of personal luxury. And in a small chemistry laboratory on the outskirts of the city, a young man named Eugène Schuller is obsessed with a problem that sounds almost trivial, until you follow it to its logical conclusion. Women were dyeing their hair. They had been for centuries. But the products available in 1907 were crude, toxic, and deeply unreliable. Some contained lead. Some caused severe skin burns. Some turned hair colors that no woman had ever asked for. The beauty industry, such as it was a patchwork of dangerous guesswork. Schuller, a trained chemist with a degree from the prestigious Institut Chimique de Paris, believed he could do better. In 1907, working out of his own apartment, he formulated the world's first safe, synthetic hair dye. He called it L'Oreal. It worked. It was reproducible. It was scalable. He was 23 years old. The following year, in 1909, he officially registered his company. He named it the Société Française de Teinture Inoffensive pour Cheveux, the French Society of Inoffensive Hair Dyes. It was a mouthful. The world would eventually know it by a far simpler name, L'Oreal. In those early years, Schuller was essentially a one-man operation, chemist, salesman, and delivery driver all at once. He sold his hair dye directly to Parisian hairdressers, cycling through the city with bottles tucked under his arm. By 1910, he had enough clients to rent his first proper office. By 1920, he had expanded into 3 countries. By 1950, L'Oreal products were being sold across 5 continents. But here is where the story pivots from inspiring to extraordinary. Eugène Schuller had one child, a daughter. Her name was Liliane. Born in 1922, Liliane Schuller grew up inside the empire her father was building, watching, absorbing, learning the architecture of wealth from the inside. When Eugène died in 1957, He left his daughter something that no amount of money could manufacture. He left her 100% of L'Oréal. At the time, the company was already worth hundreds of millions of francs and growing at a rate that was beginning to unsettle competitors across Europe. Liliane Bettencourt, she had married French politician André Bettencourt by then, suddenly found herself in control of the most valuable cosmetics company on Earth. She was 35 years old, and the machine was only just beginning to accelerate. When Liliane Bettencourt inherited L'Oréal in 1957, the company was already successful. But successful and dominant are two very different things. What happened over the next 4 decades was not organic growth. It was systematic, almost surgical conquest. Liliane understood something that most heirs never grasp, that inheriting a machine is not enough. You have to know when to let the machine run and when to reach in and recalibrate it. Her first major move came in 1963 when she took L'Oréal public on the Paris Stock Exchange. This was a calculated risk. Going public meant opening the company's ownership to outside investors, but it also meant access to capital on a scale that private funding could never match. The IPO was a success. Almost immediately, L'Oréal had the financial firepower to start acquiring, and acquire it did. In 1965, L'Oréal purchased Lancôme, the iconic French luxury beauty brand, in a deal that instantly elevated the company from mass-market chemist to luxury beauty powerhouse. It was the first domino. Garnier followed. Then Maybelline, acquired in 1996 for $758 million. At the time, one of the largest acquisitions in the history of the beauty industry. Then Kiehl's in 2000. Giorgio Armani Beauty via licensing. Urban Decay, IT Cosmetics, NYX Professional Makeup. One by one, decade by decade, L'Oréal absorbed the brands that women trusted most, quietly placing them all under the same roof, Liliane's roof. But the single most consequential move in the entire history of the Bettencourt fortune didn't happen inside the beauty industry at all. It happened in a boardroom in 1974, and it involved a man named James Nestlé. That year, Liliane made the decision to sell a 49% stake in L'Oréal to Nestlé, the Swiss food and consumer goods giant, in exchange for a cross-shareholding arrangement that gave L'Oréal access to Nestlé's global distribution network. On the surface, it looked like a compromise. In reality, it was a masterstroke. The partnership gave L'Oréal instant access to 150 countries worth of supply chain infrastructure, something that would have taken decades and billions to build independently. The Bettencourt family retained 51% control. They gave up nothing that mattered. They gained everything that did. By 1990, L'Oréal was the undisputed #1 beauty company on the planet. Annual revenues crossed $7 billion. The company employed over 40,000 people worldwide. And then Liliane did something that changed the trajectory of the family fortune forever. She began transferring her wealth, quietly, structurally, legally, to her daughter. That daughter was Françoise. Born in 1953, Françoise Bettencourt Meyers had always been the quieter figure in the family story. While her mother, Liliane, was photographed at Parisian galas and became a fixture of French high society, Françoise married a scholar, Jean-Pierre Meyers, published books on Greco-Roman mythology and biblical commentary, and largely stayed out of the spotlight. But make no mistake, she was watching, she was learning, and she was preparing. Because what was coming for the Bettencourt family was not just a transfer of wealth, it was a war. Before we get to the war, and we will get there, because it is one of the most dramatic inheritance battles in the history of European wealth, we need to stop and fully absorb what Françoise Bettencourt Meyers actually owns today. Because the numbers are almost difficult to process. As of 2024, Françoise holds an estimated net worth of approximately $99 billion. That figure fluctuates with L'Oréal's stock price, and L'Oréal's stock price over the last 2 decades has done almost nothing but climb. To put that number in human terms, $99 billion is enough to buy every single NFL franchise in existence, all 32 of them, and still have roughly $25 billion left over. It is more than the combined fortunes of Oprah Winfrey, Rihanna, and Taylor Swift multiplied by a factor that makes the comparison almost absurd. She is not just the richest woman alive. She is the richest woman who has ever lived, in recorded human history. The engine of that fortune is L'Oréal, and the scale of that engine is staggering. The company generates annual revenues of approximately $44 billion, making it not just the world's largest beauty company, but one of the most profitable consumer goods corporations on Earth. It operates in 150 countries. It employs over 87,000 people. It owns 36 international brands spanning every segment of the market, from the drugstore shelf to the most exclusive department stores on Fifth Avenue and the Champs-Élysées. Think about your morning routine for a moment. If you've used L'Oréal Paris, Garnier, Maybelline, Lancôme, Kiehl's, Urban Decay, NYX, Giorgio Armani Beauty, Yves Saint Laurent Beauté, Vichy, CeraVe, La Roche-Posay, or Redken, you have put money directly into Françoise Bettencourt Meyers' pocket before you've finished getting dressed in the morning. That is the invisible hand at work. L'Oréal's market capitalization as of 2024 sits at approximately $220 billion, larger than the GDP of Portugal and nearly double the GDP of Morocco. The Bettencourt Meyers family controls approximately 33% of that company through their holding structure, Tethys Invest, a privately held financial vehicle that manages the family's L'Oréal stake along with a diversified portfolio of other investments. And the diversification is significant. Tethys Invest holds positions in European financial institutions, real estate assets across France and Switzerland, and a growing portfolio of private equity investments. The holding company is structured with the kind of legal and financial architecture that makes it almost impossible for outside forces, governments, creditors, or hostile acquirers to destabilize. It is not just a fortune, it is a fortress. But here is what makes the Bettencourt Meyers empire truly extraordinary, and what separates it from the tech billionaires and hedge fund titans who dominate most wealth rankings. This fortune was not built on disruption. It was not built on algorithms, social media, or venture capital. It was built on something far more fundamental: the universal human desire to feel beautiful. Every recession, every pandemic, every economic crisis in modern history has proven one thing consistently: people will cut their food budget before they cut their beauty budget. Economists even have a name for it: the lipstick effect, the documented phenomenon where beauty product sales actually increase during economic downturns. Françoise Bettencourt Meyers does not just own a company, she owns a psychological constant of human civilization. And the most remarkable part? She has never run a day-to-day operation in her life. She sits on L'Oréal's board. She guides strategy from a distance. She protects the dynasty with the precision of a chess grandmaster. And she does it all from behind a wall of deliberate, almost architectural invisibility. But that invisibility was tested, severely, by someone who got very, very close to dismantling everything. Before we pull back the curtain on the war that nearly broke the Bettencourt dynasty and the shocking cast of characters involved, let's step inside the world that Françoise Bettencourt Meyers actually inhabits. Because this is where the numbers stop being abstract. The Bettencourt family's primary residence is a sprawling estate in Neuilly-sur-Seine, the wealthiest commune in France, sitting just west of Paris, where the average property value makes Manhattan real estate look modest by comparison. The family compound in Neuilly is not merely a home. It is a fortress of old European wealth, surrounded by manicured grounds, protected by layers of private security, and furnished with one of the most significant private art collections in France. The specific contents of that collection have never been fully disclosed to the public. What has been confirmed through court documents and investigative reporting is that the art and objects inside that estate represent value in the hundreds of millions of euros. Just the art. The Bettencourt family also maintains a villa in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, arguably the most exclusive stretch of coastline in the entire world. Situated on the French Riviera between Nice and Monaco, Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat is a narrow peninsula where land is so scarce and so desired that a single property routinely sells for $50 to $100 million. The Bettencourts have owned their villa there for decades. It sits behind gates. It does not appear on tourist maps. It is the kind of property that is passed down through generations not as an asset, but as a birthright. There is also a chateau in the Loire Valley, France's historic heartland of aristocratic estates, where vineyards, forests, and formal gardens stretch across hundreds of acres in the kind of landscape that looks like it was painted by a Renaissance master. Because, in many cases, it was. Françoise herself is not the conspicuous consumer you might expect from someone worth nearly $100 billion. She does not collect super yachts. She does not commission vanity space launches. Her public appearances are rare. A board meeting here, a philanthropic event there. She dresses elegantly, but without ostentation. She has spoken in interviews, the few she has given, about preferring the company of her family and her books to the machinery of high society. She has authored multiple volumes on Greco-Roman mythology and biblical commentary, serious academic works, not vanity projects, and is known within French intellectual circles as a genuinely formidable scholar. She plays classical piano at a concert level. She and her husband, Jean-Pierre Meyers, a grandson of a rabbi and a respected cultural figure in his own right, have two sons, Jean-Victor and Nicolas Meyers, both of whom have been quietly positioned within the L'Oréal ecosystem, learning the architecture of the empire from the inside. And while Françoise may live with more restraint than her fortune would suggest, her late mother, Liliane, was a different story entirely. Liliane Bettencourt, who passed away in September 2017 at the age of 94, was one of the great figures of French high society for 5 decades. Her parties at the Neuilly estate were legendary. Her guest lists included sitting presidents, Nobel laureates, fashion icons, and artists of global renown. She owned jewels that rivaled the collections of European royalty. She was photographed in the front rows of Chanel and Dior couture shows for decades. She once gifted a single photographer, a man named François-Marie Garnier, art, cash, and life insurance policies worth an estimated $1.3 billion over the course of their friendship. $1.3 billion to a photographer. That single detail, that one staggering, almost incomprehensible act of generosity or manipulation, depending on who you ask, is what ignited the most explosive family war in the history of French wealth, and it nearly brought the entire dynasty to its knees. The year is 2007. Liliane Bettencourt is 84 years old, one of the wealthiest people on the planet, and, according to her daughter Françoise, dangerously vulnerable. For years, a charismatic French photographer named François-Marie Garnier had been a fixture in Liliane's life. He was charming, intellectually stimulating, and utterly captivating to an elderly woman whose husband had died in 2007 and whose social world was slowly contracting. Garnier had first entered Liliane's orbit in the 1980s, introduced through mutual friends in Parisian artistic circles. Over time, the friendship deepened into something that Françoise found deeply alarming. Between the mid-1990s and 2010, Liliane had gifted Garnier an almost incomprehensible array of assets: the paintings by Picasso and Matisse, life insurance policies, cash transfers, real estate. The total value of what changed hands has been estimated at approximately $1.3 billion, making it arguably the largest personal gift from one individual to another in modern French history. Françoise was convinced her mother was being exploited. In 2007, she filed a formal legal complaint, not just a civil suit, but a criminal complaint, accusing Garnier of taking advantage of a person in a state of psychological weakness. The charge in French law is called abus de faiblesse, abuse of weakness. It was a charge that, if proven, could result in prison time. What followed was not just a courtroom battle, it was a national spectacle. The case consumed French media for the better part of a decade. It drew in sitting politicians, former presidents, and some of the most powerful figures in French society. Eric Worth, a former French budget minister and treasurer of Nicolas Sarkozy's political party, was implicated when it emerged that his wife had been employed by the Bettencourt household, and that Liliane may have made illegal cash donations to Sarkozy's 2007 presidential campaign. The allegation was explosive. It suggested that the Bettencourt fortune had quietly financed the ascent of a French head of state. Sarkozy denied everything. The donations were never definitively proven in court. But the damage to France's political establishment was real, and the investigation dragged on for years, pulling senior government officials into depositions and document reviews that made front pages across Europe. Meanwhile, the Bettencourt case itself took an even more dramatic turn. Secret recordings, made inside the Bettencourt estate by a butler named Pascal Bonfoy, were leaked to the press. Those recordings captured Liliane and her financial advisors discussing hidden offshore accounts in Switzerland, tax optimization structures, and, most damaging of all, apparent conversations that called into question Liliane's mental competency at the time she was making her gifts to Garnier. The recordings were a sensation. They were also legally contentious, obtained without consent. their admissibility debated in multiple courts simultaneously. By 2010, Liliane had publicly broken with her daughter, issuing statements saying she was of sound mind and that Françoise was attempting to control her. The mother and daughter, two of the most powerful women in France, were engaged in open warfare, their conflict playing out in courtrooms, newspapers, and televised press statements. It was, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary family ruptures in the history of European wealth. And then slowly, the tide began to turn. In 2015, François-Marie Garnier was convicted of abusing the weakness of Liliane Bettencourt and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, later reduced on appeal. He was ordered to repay a significant portion of what he had received. Several of Liliane's financial advisors were also convicted of related charges. In 2016, a French court ruled that Liliane had indeed been suffering from Alzheimer's disease during the period of the most significant gifts, a ruling that validated everything Françoise had been arguing for nearly a decade. Françoise had won, but the victory revealed something far more significant than a family dispute resolved. It revealed the depth of the legal and financial architecture that the Bettencourt family had built around their fortune, and the lengths to which Françoise was willing to go to protect it. She had spent nearly 10 years in courtrooms, under public scrutiny, fighting not just for her inheritance, but for the integrity of the dynasty her grandfather had built from a chemistry lab in 1907. That is not the behavior of a passive heiress. That is the behavior of a sovereign protecting her throne. And the political connections unearthed during the scandal hinted at something that goes far beyond beauty products and stock portfolios. The Bettencourt fortune has historically operated at the intersection of French business, politics, and culture in ways that are rarely visible from the outside. L'Oréal's influence on French trade policy, its relationships with successive French governments, and its role as one of France's most powerful corporate ambassadors on the world stage. These are dimensions of power that never appear on a Forbes ranking. The fortune is the visible part. The influence is the iceberg beneath. Every great dynasty eventually faces the same question: not how to build the wealth, not even how to protect it, but how to transfer it across generations, across decades, across a world that is constantly changing, without losing the essential thing that made it extraordinary in the first place. For the Bettencourt Meyers family, that question is not hypothetical. It is already being answered. Françoise and her husband, Jean-Pierre Meyers, have two sons. Jean-Victor Meyers, born in 1974, and Nicolas Meyers, born in 1975. Both men have been deliberately, systematically integrated into the L'Oréal power structure over the past 2 decades. Jean-Victor currently sits on L'Oréal's board of directors, the same board his mother chairs as the company's largest individual shareholder. He is widely regarded within French financial circles as the heir apparent to the family's strategic role in the company's governance. Nicolas has taken a somewhat different path, more focused on the family's philanthropic and cultural endeavors, but remains deeply embedded in the broader Bettencourt Meyers ecosystem. The vehicle through which the family's wealth is managed and will ultimately be transferred is Tethys Invest, the private holding company that controls the family's L'Oréal stake. Tethys is structured with the kind of legal sophistication that reflects decades of expert estate planning. It is designed to be generationally durable, resistant to the kind of forced liquidation, hostile acquisition, or inheritance fragmentation that has dismantled other great European fortunes over time. The family also controls the Bettencourt Schuler Foundation, named in honor of Françoise's grandfather Eugène Schuler, which is one of the largest private philanthropic foundations in France. With an endowment of approximately 500 million euros and an annual giving budget that funds scientific research, cultural preservation, and humanitarian aid across multiple continents, the foundation is both a genuine expression of values and a powerful tool of soft influence. It has funded groundbreaking research in neuroscience, supported emerging artists across France, and financed humanitarian programs in sub-Saharan Africa. Philanthropy at this level is never purely altruistic. It is also legacy architecture. It is the way a dynasty writes its name, not just into financial history, but into the cultural and scientific fabric of civilization itself. The Rockefellers understood this, the Carnegies understood this, and the Bettencourt Meyers family, with the foundation bearing the name of the chemist who started it all with a bottle of hair dye in a Parisian apartment in 1907, understands it too. As for L'Oréal itself, the engine, the machine, the source of everything, the company shows no signs of slowing. Under current CEO Nicolas Hieronymus, who took the helm in 2021. L'Oréal has accelerated its push into premium skincare, dermatological beauty, and the rapidly expanding markets of India, Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The company's acquisition of Aesop in 2023 for $2.5 billion, the largest acquisition in L'Oréal's history, signaled clearly that the dynasty is not resting on its legacy. It is still hunting. Every acquisition makes the family richer. Every new market entered compounds the fortune further. Every morning, in 150 countries, in hundreds of millions of bathrooms, the machine runs. And somewhere in a quiet estate in Neuilly-sur-Seine, or perhaps at a piano in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, Françoise Bettencourt Meyers, the granddaughter of a 23-year-old chemist with a dream in a bottle, sits at the apex of it all. She did not found an empire. She became one. And here is the thought I want to leave you with. We live in an era obsessed with the visible billionaire. The ones who launch rockets, post on social media, and compete for headlines. We have built an entire cultural mythology around the idea that true power announces itself. But the Bettencourt Meyers story suggests something far more unsettling and far more fascinating. The most durable power in human history has almost always been quiet. It has been structural, generational, hidden in plain sight inside the products we use every single day, the companies we trust without question, the brands so embedded in our routines that we stopped noticing them long ago. Eugen Schuler started with a bottle of hair dye and a bicycle. His great-grandsons will likely still be among the wealthiest people on Earth in 2075. That is not luck. That is not talent alone. That is the architecture of a dynasty, built molecule by molecule, acquisition by acquisition, generation by generation, across more than a century of deliberate, patient, almost invisible power. So the next time you reach for that bottle in your bathroom, whatever brand it is, wherever you bought it, ask yourself one question. Who profits when you feel beautiful?